The chamber was enormous. Not the kind of enormous that impressed anyone anymore. After enough years working inside the Galactic Assembly, the vaulted ceilings and the colored light falling through crystalline panels became wallpaper. Counselor Devon Mercer had stopped seeing the room itself about 7 years ago. He saw the people in it. He saw who sat forward in their chairs and who leaned back. He saw which delegations spoke to each other before sessions and which ones looked away. He had been reading rooms like this for a long time. Long enough to know exactly how much his proposal mattered to the people in this one. Not enough. He knew that going in. It didn't change anything. He stood at the floor address podium, a flat disc of dark material that elevated the speaker by exactly 12 centimeters. A number that meant nothing, and still made every speaker stand slightly straighter, and he spoke. Clear, measured sentences. The Infrastructure Coalition proposal, 11 years in the building, was a framework for shared logistics, resource routing, and mutual construction across 31 systems. It was not glamorous. It was the kind of work that made other, more exciting things possible. It kept medical shipments moving, and communication relays stable, and water purification equipment replaced before it failed. He was 4 minutes into the address when High Matriarch Thesivor Kaun of the Velhari spoke. She did not raise an objection. She did not ask for the floor. She simply began speaking, from her elevated gallery position on the left tier, in a tone that assumed the room was already listening to her. It was. The Assembly notes the continued presentation of minor species development initiatives, she said. Her voice was the kind of deep and layered sound the Velhari produced naturally, multiple tones braided together, which many species found authoritative before the words even registered. The Earth Representative's proposal will be catalogued in the Developmental Assistance Archive for review at a later cycle. The Earth Representative, not Counselor Mercer. Not the human delegation. Not even Earth's proposal. The Earth Representative's proposal. As though he were a footnote, someone had accidentally read aloud. The chamber stirred, but not with outrage. It was the opposite of outrage. It was the sound of a room settling the particular quiet that meant everyone had heard, no one was surprised, and no one planned to say anything about it. Half the delegates looked at their data screens. One Dravani ambassador turned to whisper something to his aide. A Rilthani observer in the third gallery, a woman Mercer knew as Ambassador Lyra Sen, went very still. Mercer stopped talking. Not dramatically. Not the way a man stops talking when he wants the room to notice he has stopped. He stopped the way machinery stops when the power is cut complete, immediate, without residual noise. He looked at his materials on the podium surface. A data tablet. A written summary, 3 pages of supporting figures he had not yet reached. He picked them up, one at a time. The tablet first, then the papers, which he aligned against the podium edge, the way a person aligns papers when they are in no hurry at all. He stepped off the podium. He walked across the chamber floor toward the exit corridor. His footsteps were even. He did not look at Kaun's gallery. He did not look at anyone. The walk from the podium to the corridor entrance was perhaps 30 meters. He covered it in the same unhurried stride he used everywhere, the kind of walk that suggested the destination had been decided some time ago. The door opened at his approach. It closed behind him. The chamber was quiet for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Then the session moderator cleared the floor, called the next address, and the assembly continued, as it always did, smoothly, efficiently, as though nothing had happened, because for most of the room, nothing had. Up in the third gallery, Ambassador Lyra Sen had not moved. She was Rilthani, which meant her face did not do the things human faces did, and most species couldn't read her expression regardless. Her aide, a young Rilthani male named Korev, leaned toward her slightly. "Should we follow the human delegation?" he asked. "To offer something. Solidarity, perhaps. A statement of support." Sen watched the door at the far end of the chamber floor. The door that had closed, quietly, behind a man who had said nothing. The proposal had been 11 years in development. She had read the documentation. She knew the scope of what Earth had quietly built, system by system, without announcement or ceremony, the infrastructure architecture that sat beneath 31 systems like bones beneath skin. Necessary. Invisible. Unremarked upon. Until it wasn't there. She thought about Khan's tone. The Earth representative. Not said with malice. Said with the easy authority of a woman who had never once considered that the person she was dismissing might have opinions about it. No, Sen said. Korev waited. We don't follow, she said. We watch. He looked at her for a moment, reading something in her stillness. What are we watching for? He asked. Sen was quiet for a beat that ran a little long. I don't know yet, she said. But I don't think that man just lost something. She finally looked away from the door. I think something just changed and we're still figuring out what. Khan did not think about it again that day. She had 12 other sessions, a block coordination meeting, and a trade adjustment discussion with the OSEC corridor representatives. The assembly had run long, her staff were efficient, and her calendar was full. The human counselor's exit was mentioned once, by a junior aide who framed it as an embarrassment for the Earth delegation. Kaun agreed, without particular interest, and moved on. Why would she linger on it? The Earth representative had lost composure, had walked out, had confirmed what the room already understood, that the proposal was a small thing, brought by a small delegation, from a species that had been building infrastructure in secondary systems for the better part of a decade, because they had not been able to compete in the primary ones. It was almost kind, she thought, that she had saved the chamber's time. She did not think about him again. That was, she would eventually understand, the second mistake. The first had been believing that a man who had spent 11 years quietly making himself indispensable would walk away from something without finishing his math. That evening, in the Earth delegation's modest offices on the assembly compound's 7th level, Devon Mercer sat at a plain table with a cup of something that was close enough to coffee and a blank document open on his screen. His attaché, a woman named Brielle, stood in the doorway. Do you want me to file a complaint? She asked. Formal censure request? Breach of floor protocol? Mercer thought about it. Really thought about it, the way he thought about structural problems from the foundation up. No, he said. A statement then? Something to the press channels, so the record shows. No, she waited. She had worked with him long enough to know that his silence was not absence of thought. Pull me the full logistical dependency mapping, he said. Every system in the Velhari sphere of influence. Cross-reference with every active Earth infrastructure contract, maintenance agreement, and service routing we currently hold. Brielle was still for a moment. That's going to be a long document, she said. I know, said Mercer. He took a sip of his almost coffee. Take your time, he said. Be accurate. She left. He looked at the blank document on his screen. Outside the window, the assembly compound lit up in the way it did each evening. A slow, warm sequence. System by system. All the lights in all the offices of all the species that had gathered here to do the work of managing a galaxy. He thought about load-bearing things. He thought about what happened when they stopped. He did not write anything yet. He closed the document, finished his drink, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. As a man who has already decided something, and therefore has nothing left to worry about. The assembly didn't talk about it for long. A human walking out of a floor address was not, by galactic standards, significant. Species walked out of sessions all the time in protest, in outrage, in confusion over translated idioms that had come out wrong. The incident was filed under the same quiet heading as 100 other small diplomatic frictions. Noted, logged, forgotten. Khan's office issued nothing. There was nothing to issue. A courtesy was rendered. A proposal was archived. The chamber moved on. The Dravani ambassador, at a social function 2 days later, mentioned to a colleague that the Earth delegation had seemed rattled. The OSEC corridor representatives heard this and agreed. The general consensus, assembled over drinks and quiet conversations in the corridors of power, was that the humans had overreached with an overly ambitious proposal and lost their composure when it was appropriately contextualized. No one called it what it was. Ambassador Sen did not attend the social function. She was in her office, looking at numbers. She had asked her research staff to build a map, the kind of map that didn't show geography but showed dependency. Who relied on what? Which systems would feel a problem first if a particular supply line slowed, or a maintenance agreement lapsed, or a routing decision was made differently somewhere upstream? The map took her staff 3 days to assemble. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Earth's infrastructure presence across the Velhari sphere of influence was not dramatic. It did not look powerful. It looked like plumbing. It looked like the behind-the-walls work that a building needed to stand, not the columns, not the windows, not the facade anyone admired, the water lines, the load-bearing walls, the quiet things. 17 systems. Not all of them Velhari controlled, but all of them within the Velhari sphere systems that Kounsblock considered its natural territory, its breadbasket, its buffer zone. Earth had spent years building inside those systems, not through political positioning, through contracts, maintenance work, infrastructure proposals that were too small for anyone important to care about, approved at administrative levels by officials who needed the work done and had nobody else reliable to do it. The result was a network, not weaponized, not pointed at anyone, just present, functional, necessary. Sen looked at the map for a long time. Then she asked her staff to run a second analysis. What would change, in each of those 17 systems, if Earth's infrastructure contributions simply stopped being renewed? The results came back the next morning. She read them with her tea going cold beside her, because she kept forgetting to drink it. The changes in the Earth delegation's behavior were small enough that most of the assembly didn't notice them. Mercer's office requested no emergency sessions, filed no formal complaints, made no public statements. The human delegation attended every scheduled engagement, responded to every communication, and remained, by all visible measures, perfectly operational and entirely pleasant. 3 mid-level trade liaison positions. Earth staff embedded in Velhari-adjacent systems to facilitate ongoing contract work were quietly recalled for what the official documentation described as standard rotation. Their replacements were not immediately assigned. 2 infrastructure subcontracts, both in Velhari-adjacent systems, were declined by Earth's logistics division. The letters were polite. They cited reallocation of developmental resources. They offered no elaboration. Neither of these things was unusual on its own. Staff rotations happened. Contracts were declined all the time. The assembly ran on thousands of moving pieces, and most of them moved without anyone attaching significance. Sen attached significance. She made a quiet inquiry through a back channel she had been maintaining for years, a contacts network built on the principle that the most useful information in galactic diplomacy was almost never announced. But it was usually findable if you knew where the quiet people sat. The quiet people confirmed what she was starting to understand. Mercer had gone home to Earth for a week after the assembly session. He had met with Earth's Infrastructure Development Authority, not the Diplomatic Corps, not the Foreign Affairs Office. The infrastructure people, the engineers and logisticians and systems architects, the people who built the plumbing. He had come back with a work schedule, not a diplomatic agenda. Times work schedule. Korev found Sen in the observation deck, off the assembly's eastern wing, on a morning when the light was coming in at a low angle and turning everything a flat, clean gold. The Velhari bloc sent a preliminary communication to Earth's diplomatic office, he said. They want to discuss the archived proposal. Not formally. Informally. A conversation. Sen nodded. She had expected this. Not this fast, but she had expected it. Did Earth respond? They did. They acknowledged receipt. They said Counselor Mercer's schedule would be checked, and they would be in touch. And has his schedule been checked? As of this morning, no response has been sent. Sen said nothing. The light moved across the deck floor in a slow, flat sheet. The Velhari delegation is interpreting the silence as strategic positioning, Korev offered. They think he's making them wait deliberately, applying pressure. Maybe, said Sen. You don't think so? She thought about the work schedule, the engineers, the infrastructure people, the kind of man who, when publicly dismissed in front of the Galactic Assembly, went home and had a meeting with his plumbers. I think, she said, that his schedule actually is full. Korev considered this. That's worse, he said. Yes, said Sen. It is. Mercer, at that moment, was 4 systems away from the assembly compound, standing in a maintenance facility on the edge of the Thressen cluster, a grouping of small, independently governed systems that had been on the outside of Velhari's sphere influence for decades, not through any formal exclusion, but through the slow, structural reality of not mattering enough to be included. They had old equipment, aging relays, medical distribution networks that worked because the people running them were resourceful, not because the underlying architecture was sound. He walked through the facility with the lead engineer, a Thressen woman named Orveth, who had been submitting infrastructure support requests to the Assembly Developmental Archive for 11 years without a meaningful response. She showed him everything. She did not oversell it. She showed him what was failing, what was going to fail, and what could be made to work if someone committed to doing the work properly. Mercer took notes on a physical pad. He did not check his messages. He did not think about the assembly. He asked her how long the remediation would take if they started now. She told him. He wrote it down. We can start now, he said. Orveth looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone who had heard versions of that sentence before and learned not to trust them. You said the same thing 11 years ago, she said. It wasn't an accusation. Just a statement of fact. Delivered flat. Mercer nodded. I did, he said. The proposal went to the assembly. It got shelved. I am not going to the assembly with this one. She looked at him. Then how? Bilateral agreement, he said. Earth and the Thressen cluster. Direct. No assembly involvement required. Orveth was quiet for a moment. That will annoy the Velhari, she said. Mercer looked out through the facility's broad windows at the low red light of the Thressen system's sun settling behind a ridge of industrial equipment. Probably, he said. He said it the way a man says something that he considered a long time ago and has since stopped worrying about. The first report landed on Khan's desk 6 months after the assembly session. It was not alarming. That was the problem with it. An alarming report would have had a clear enemy, a clear cause, a clear response. This report had none of those things. It had a list of systems, a list of issues, and a column of dates showing when each issue had started. The issues were mundane. A water purification relay in the Osik corridor had gone offline, standard end-of-cycle equipment failure, no replacement contract on file. A medical supply route through the Dravani passage was running at reduced capacity. Earth's routing algorithm had reclassified it as lower priority during a recent efficiency recalibration. A communications relay in the Hessel system needed maintenance. The contractor who handled it had not renewed their agreement with the local administration. Separately, none of it was a crisis. Taken together, the list had a texture that Khan's senior advisor, a careful man named Tevin, found unsettling in a way he couldn't immediately name. Contact the Earth mission, Khan said. Ask them to address the routing issue. The medical route is the most urgent. Tevin's office sent the communication. Earth's diplomatic office responded the same day, which was faster than expected, and somehow still not reassuring. The response was thorough. It included full documentation of the routing recalibration dates, decision logic, efficiency metrics, the specific parameters that had been weighted in the algorithm update. Everything was compliant. Everything was within Earth's operational discretion. Everything was, by any formal standard, completely reasonable. There was no hostility in the letter. There was no coldness. It was the correspondence of an office that was genuinely trying to be helpful, which made Tevin read it 3 times, looking for something that wasn't there. They've given us everything we asked for, he told Khan. Then what is the problem? Tevin thought about how to say it. The problem, he said slowly, is that what they've given us is an explanation, not a solution. The route is still running at half capacity. The explanation tells us why. It doesn't tell us when it will be restored. Khan looked at him. Ask them when. He did. The response came back within the hour. Warm, professional, technically accurate. Current resource allocation commitments meant that route restoration was not scheduled at this time. Earth's logistics division was happy to revisit this in the next planning cycle, approximately 14 months from the current date. 14 months. The frictions accumulated the way small frictions do, individually ignorable, collectively maddening. The Hessel relay maintenance was eventually handled by a local contractor with less experience, which meant the job took longer, and the relay ran intermittently for 6 weeks while the work was completed. The Osik water purification system got a temporary patch from a Dravani engineering team that kept it functional but flagged it for proper replacement within 18 months. Each of these things had a reasonable explanation. None of them were Earth's fault in any documentable sense. Earth's contracts had lapsed on standard cycles. Earth's agreements had not been renewed because Earth's resources had been redirected toward other commitments, new bilateral agreements. Tevan eventually learned. With systems in the Thressen cluster and 2 other small independent groupings that had historically been on the margins of everyone's attention, Earth was busy doing good work somewhere else, which was entirely within Earth's rights, which did not help the Osik corridor. At a routine diplomatic function in the Assembly Compound's 3rd-level reception hall, a young Velhari advisor, named Drevet, found herself standing beside Ambassador Sen, near a window that looked out over the compound's central plaza. Drevet was not diplomatic by nature. She was a logistics specialist, by training the kind of official who dealt in supply chains and routing tables and maintenance schedules, rather than political maneuver. She had been brought into Khan's advisory staff specifically because she understood infrastructure, which meant she understood exactly what she was looking at. "Is this retaliation?" she asked Sen. Sen looked at her. She took a long moment before answering. "I don't think so," she said. Drevet stared at her. "You don't think so?" she repeated. "Our medical route is running at half capacity. We have 3 relay maintenance backlogs. The Earth staff who handled our secondary logistics for the last 7 years have been rotated out and not replaced. And you don't think it's retaliation?" "Retaliation implies intent to harm," Sen said. "I think what's happening is simpler than that." Drevet waited. "I think Earth stopped pointing in your direction," Sen said. "That's all. There's no attack, no plan to hurt you. They just reoriented. And when they did, you discovered how much of your operational stability had been quietly resting on work they were doing." The plaza below was busy with afternoon foot traffic delegates from a dozen species moving between buildings on their various pieces of galactic business. "How do we fix it?" Drevet asked. Sen was quiet for a beat. "You could build your own infrastructure in those systems," she said. "Hire different contractors. Develop internal capacity. It would take time." "How much time?" Sen thought about the dependency mapping her staff had built. The 17 systems. The years of accumulated work underneath them. "Years," she said. Drevet absorbed this. "Or we could get Earth to re-engage." "Yes," said Sen. "How?" Sen looked out at the plaza. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I'd think carefully about how you ask. Because the last time Earth came to this assembly with something to offer, your matriarch talked over the man presenting it, and filed it in the archive." Drevet said nothing. "He noticed," Sen said. "They always notice. They just don't always do anything about it quickly enough for you to connect the cause to the effect." Tevan briefed Khan that evening. He laid it out plainly, because Tevan had learned over many years that the matriarch preferred plain speech, even when the plain speech was uncomfortable. He told her about the accumulated frictions, the dependency analysis he had quietly commissioned, the scope of Earth's infrastructure presence across the Velhari sphere, and the fact that Earth's recent activity had been a systematic, quiet reorientation toward other regions. Khan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a moment. "This is about the assembly session," she said. "I believe so." "He walked out," she said. "He said nothing. He made no complaint. He filed no grievance." "No," said Tevan. Khan thought about this. She had managed the Velhari block for 31 years. She had seen retaliation. She had seen grudges, formal disputes, threatened sanctions, trade embargoes, cold diplomatic silences that went on for decades. She knew what it looked like when a species decided to punish another species for an insult. This did not look like that. It looked like something she had less experience with. It looked like a man who had been doing a calculation for 11 years, had reached a result, updated his variables, and started the calculation over somewhere else. Not because he was angry, because the old calculation no longer made sense. "Contact Counselor Mercer's office," she said. "Request a meeting, not a formal session. A conversation." Tevan nodded. "And matriarch," he said carefully. "What should I say we wish to discuss?" Khan looked at him. "Tell him," she said, after a pause, "that we would like to revisit the infrastructure proposal." Tevan wrote it down. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that the infrastructure proposal, as Mercer had originally designed it, no longer existed in any meaningful form. The systems it had been built around had spent 6 months quietly coming loose at the seams. The world that proposal had been designed for was not the current world. He hoped Khan understood that. He did not think she did yet. Mercer's response to the meeting request came back in 4 days. Not because he was making them wait. His schedule genuinely required 4 days to open a slot. Tevan confirmed this through back channels, and found it more unsettling than strategic silence would have been. The meeting was set for a morning session in one of the assembly compound's smaller conference rooms. Not the grand chamber, not a formal floor address. A table, 8 chairs, 2 delegations. The kind of room where real conversations happened, away from gallery observation and official record. Kaun did not attend personally. She sent Tevan as lead, accompanied by Drevet and 2 senior block advisors. The choice was deliberate, sending Tevan communicated seriousness, without the matriarch making herself the face of an outreach that still felt, to Kaun's instincts, like something that should be managed at the working level. She would understand, later, that this was its own mistake. Another in a sequence she had not yet fully mapped. Mercer came alone except for Brielle, his attaché. They sat down. Tea was served. Tevan opened with a prepared statement carefully worded, acknowledging the value of Earth's contributions to regional infrastructure, expressing the Velhari bloc's interest in renewed cooperative frameworks. He did not mention the assembly session. He had spent considerable time making sure he did not need to. Mercer listened. He did not take notes, which meant he did not need to. When Tevan finished, there was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds. "Thank you," Mercer said. "I appreciate the directness." He set his hands flat on the table. "I want to be honest with you about where things stand. Not to be difficult, just because I think it saves time." Tevan nodded. "The original proposal was designed around a specific geography," Mercer said. 17 systems in or adjacent to your sphere, plus a framework for expansion into 4 secondary clusters. Earth had spent years pre-positioning infrastructure capacity to support that network. The math worked because of that pre-positioning. He paused. Over the last several months, that pre-positioning has been redirected. The Thressen cluster, the Valori margin, 2 independent systems in the outer Dravani corridor. We have active bilateral agreements now in all 4 regions. The teams are in place. The contracts are signed. The work is underway. Tevan kept his face neutral. Drevet did not entirely succeed at this. "What that means," Mercer continued, "is that the original proposal, the one that was archived, doesn't fit the current situation anymore. The capacity it was built on is now committed elsewhere." "Can it be uncommitted?" Tevan asked. Mercer looked at him steadily. "Some of it. Not all of it. These are contractual obligations to communities that have been waiting a long time for reliable infrastructure. I'm not going to walk those back." The room was quiet. "So what is possible?" Tevan asked. "A new proposal," Mercer said. "Built for the current situation. Different scope. Different structure. It would take time to design properly." "How much time?" 8 months. Maybe 10. Drevet leaned forward slightly. "And the system's currently experiencing supply and maintenance issues. We can offer interim support on some of them," Mercer said. "Consulting agreements, not full contracts. It won't be what it was, but it will stop the bleeding while the new framework is built." He said it without apology, not coldly, just factually. The way a doctor describes a treatment plan. This is what is possible. This is what it costs. This is the timeline. Tevan thanked him. They agreed on interim terms. The meeting concluded in just under 2 hours. The sub-council invitation came from Khan herself, 3 weeks later. It was significant. The sub-council being formed, the Regional Development and Infrastructure Coordination Body, a new assembly working group, was exactly the kind of forum where long-term logistical policy got shaped. A seat on it was real influence, not ceremonial, the kind of positioning that Mercer's original proposal had been quietly aimed at achieving, from the outside, through the slow work of making Earth indispensable. Khan was, in effect, offering him the destination without the journey. Mercer accepted. His response was prompt and genuine. No performance of reluctance, no prolonged consideration. He accepted because the seat was useful, and he was not in the business of refusing useful things out of pride. He attended the first full session of the subcouncil 10 days later. It was a large room. 18 delegations seated at a curved table, each with their own data feeds and specialist staff arranged behind them. Kaun sat at the head, which was not a formal position but functioned as one, because she was Kaun, and had always sat at heads of tables. Mercer sat at the curve, 7 seats from center. He had his data tablet. He had Brielle. He was entirely present and entirely professional. The session moved through agenda items: framework establishment, scope definition, resource mapping. When it reached the infrastructure capacity segment, the moderator turned to Mercer. He presented Earth's current project load, factually, thoroughly. The Thressen cluster agreements, their scope and timeline, the Valori margin work, the outer Dravani systems. He did not editorialize. He did not signal how any of it should be interpreted. He did not need to. The delegates did their own math. The chair of the Osik Corridor delegation, a practical woman named Selveth, who had spent 30 years watching infrastructure promises fail to materialize, was the first to ask the question directly. What capacity does Earth currently have available for new commitments within this body's scope? Mercer looked at his figures. Limited, he said. We can offer technical consultation across all relevant systems. Direct project commitments. At this point, we can offer in perhaps 4 or 5 of the 18 represented regions. The rest of our active capacity is committed through the end of the current development cycle. The room processed this. 3 years ago, Earth had been on the outside of every room like this one, bringing proposals to archives that nobody read. Now they were inside the room, and the answer to what they could offer was, not very much, because they were already busy. The specific flavor of power in that answer was not lost on anyone paying attention. After the session, in the corridor outside, Kaun caught Mercer before he reached the transit junction. She did not send an aide. She walked over herself. This too was significant, and everyone in the corridor noticed it. "Counselor," she said. "Matriarch." She looked at him for a moment. She was not a woman who did things indirectly, as a rule. She had operated at the highest level of galactic politics for 3 decades by being exactly what she appeared to be, which was a very powerful person who said what she meant. "The subcouncil seat was sincerely offered," she said. "I want that understood." "I know," he said. "I accepted it sincerely." A pause. "The original proposal," she said. "It was dismissed without sufficient consideration." It was not an apology. Velhari did not apologize. Exactly. It was closer to an audit result, a formal acknowledgement that an error had been logged. Mercer nodded. "It was," he agreed. He said it without weight, not graciously, which would have meant he was performing something, just simply, as a fact, matched with another fact. Kaun looked at him for a moment longer. "The new proposal you are building," she said. "Will it give the Velhari sphere what the original offered?" Mercer was quiet for a beat. "It will give the Velhari sphere what the current situation makes possible," he said, "which is different from what was possible 14 months ago." She heard that. He could tell she heard it, because something in the quality of her attention changed, not dramatically, just a slight shift in focus, the way a person shifts when they have just understood something they were slow to understand. "I see," she said. "The new proposal will be fair," he said. "I build things to work, not to punish. You'll have full access to what I design." She nodded once. The conversation was over. She moved away. Mercer stood in the corridor for a moment, alone, watching the assembly's foot traffic move around him. Then he went back to work. It took 9 months. Not 8, as Mercer had estimated. The scope expanded twice during the design phase, not because he was being ambitious, but because the systems being incorporated kept revealing new connection points, places where a small additional element in the framework made the whole structure significantly more stable. He was an infrastructure engineer by training, and it showed in how he built things, not impressively, but soundly. Every piece justified, nothing decorative. Brielle put the final document together on a Tuesday morning. It was 214 pages of framework design, dependency mapping, timeline projections, and cost-sharing models. It was not a glamorous document. It was the kind of document that made the people who understood it very quiet. She set it on Mercer's desk. He read it cover to cover before the subcouncil session at which it was to be presented. Not because he didn't know what was in it, he had built every page, but because he believed in reading final documents the way he believed in walking finished infrastructure before signing off on it. You looked at the whole thing together. You made sure it held. It held. The subcouncil session was scheduled for 3 hours. It ran 4.5. Mercer presented for the first 40 minutes, then questions, then more questions, then a 40-minute recess during which 6 separate delegations requested private consultations with Brielle, who managed all of them without breaking a sweat. Then, more questions. The proposal was, by every measurable metric, larger than the original. More systems. 37, up from 31. The additional 6 being drawn from the Thressen cluster and the Valori margin systems that Earth had spent the last 9 months bringing up to baseline infrastructure standard, which meant they were now viable participants in a shared network rather than a drag on one. More reach. The communication relay framework in the new proposal extended into regions the original had not touched, because the bilateral work of the past 9 months had created connection points that made extension feasible. More resilience. This was the thing the subcouncil members who understood infrastructure kept returning to during the question period. The original proposal had been designed around a hub structure, with the Valhari sphere's geography making it the natural central node. The new proposal was distributed. No center, no single point of failure. Every system a node. Every node redundant. Selveth, from the Ossic corridor, asked about this directly. The original design was hub and spoke, she said. This is a mesh. That's a fundamental architectural change. Why? Mercer looked at her. Hub and spoke requires the hub to be stable, he said. Mesh doesn't have that requirement. If any node fails or becomes unavailable, the network routes around it, automatically. He said it plainly. He did not look at Khan when he said it. He did not need to. Khan sat at the head of the table and read the mesh architecture section of the proposal twice. She understood infrastructure well enough to follow it. She understood politics well enough to follow what was underneath it. The original proposal had made the Valhari sphere the center of the network. Not through any explicit statement. Mercer was too careful for explicit statements, but through geography and logic. The Valhari systems were in the right position. The network needed a center. The center would have been them. The new proposal did not need a center. The Valhari sphere was in it. Fully. Fairly. Their systems were included in the framework with the same terms and the same technical investment as any other node. They would benefit from the network. They would contribute to it. They would matter. As one node among 37, she thought about what Tevin had told her 9 months ago, after Drevitt reported her conversation with Sen, the slow accumulation of frictions, the 17 systems, the years of load-bearing work that had been quietly reoriented toward other regions. She thought about hub and spoke and mesh, and what the difference between them meant when a man had spent 11 years building toward a design and then, in the space of one assembly session, been spoken over as though he was furniture. She had not intended to harm him. That, she understood, was almost beside the point. She had simply not considered him worth the consideration. He had noticed. He had not punished her for it. He had just updated his design. The difference between the two things was not, in the final result, as large as she had hoped it might be. The vote to adopt the framework was not unanimous, it never was, in the assembly, but it was substantial. 14 of the 18 subcouncil delegations voted in favor in the first session. 3 abstentions. 1 dissent. From a small Dravani faction with political reasons unrelated to the proposal's merits. Khan voted in favor. At the end of the session, when the moderator called for closing remarks, she spoke briefly. She said that the framework represented a significant step in regional cooperative infrastructure. She said that the design work was thorough and the timeline realistic. She said that the subcouncil had done its job. Then she said, "The original proposal presented to this assembly 14 months ago was dismissed before it received the consideration it warranted. The framework we have adopted today grew from that work. That origin should be on the record." She did not look at Mercer when she said it. She looked at the moderator. But it was on the record. The corridor outside the subcouncil chamber was busy with post-session movement delegates briefing their staff, small clusters of conversation, the particular energy of a room that has just decided something significant. Sen fell into step beside Mercer in the flow of it. She had been on the subcouncil as an observer since its formation. She had watched all of it. She had the full picture in a way that most people in the corridor did not, because she had been watching from the moment the door of the assembly chamber had closed behind a man carrying his own materials. "You could have demanded an apology," she said. "I could have," he agreed. They walked. The corridor was long. You could have filed a formal grievance. Censure proceedings. The breach of floor protocol was documentable. It was. You could have gone public. Given a statement to the press channels. Made the story about what she did, instead of just leaving. Yes, she looked at him sideways. I ran models, after that session, on what Earth's infrastructure footprint actually meant for the Velhari sphere. What would happen if it stopped being renewed? She paused. You could have collapsed half their supply chain. Not dramatically. Just stopped renewing things. Let the natural deterioration happen. Mercer was quiet for a few steps. I know, he said. But you didn't. No. They reached the junction where the corridor split her floor, his floor, 2 different directions. So what was this? She asked. 9 months of work. A new proposal. A mesh instead of a hub. 37 systems instead of 31. She paused. What were you doing? Mercer stopped at the junction. He was quiet for a moment. Not the performance of consideration, the real thing, a man locating the accurate version of what he wanted to say. She spoke over me, he said finally, because she had decided I wasn't worth the consideration, that my work wasn't worth it, that Earth wasn't worth it. He looked down the corridor that led to his floor. I didn't want to prove her wrong by fighting about it, he said. I didn't want to prove her wrong by punishing her. He paused. I just wanted to keep building. And let the building be the answer. He looked at Sen. The original proposal would have made her the center of something important, he said. The new one doesn't need a center. It's better that way. More stable. More honest about how things actually work. He glanced down his corridor. That's not punishment. That's just better engineering. Sen looked at him for a moment. She acknowledged it, Sen said. On the record. That took something from her. I know, he said. I meant what I told her. The proposal is fair. The work will be good. She'll have the same access as everyone. He picked up his bag. She just won't be the center of it. He turned and walked down his corridor. Even strides. No hurry. Sen stood at the junction. The assembly compound moved around her, its lights, its foot traffic, its endless small conversations about power and position, and who mattered and who didn't. 37 systems, now connected by a mesh that had no center and no single point of failure. A network that had been designed, quietly, while everyone was looking at the politics, by a man who had simply gone back to doing what he was good at. She thought about load-bearing walls. She thought about what happens when something that has been quietly holding things up decides, without anger, without drama, to hold things up somewhere else. She stood at the junction for a while. Then she went back to work.